Dr. Sharif Abdullah offers a unique, hopeful, and visionary perspective on the persistent challenges of our time. His perspective is shaped by his urban upbringing of poverty and violence, his Ivy League education, and his work with impacted communities in America and in 45 countries around the world. His spiritual outlook is rooted in the consciousness of dozens of religions, faith traditions, and spiritual practices. Sharif offers this unique viewpoint, helping us chart a course that explains where we've been, where we are now, and how we get to a positive future that works for all living beings.
Hello, Sharif here. And today I want to talk to you about continuing the conversation that we had about vision and about will and about the future. That what we've got right now is what we planned to have 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, or we didn't plan for. Right now here in Portland, we've got somewhere around 15,000 people and families sleeping on the streets in tents. Now, that is immoral. This city is immoral. It is financially immoral. It is politically immoral. And I don't care, both political parties are the fault of this, because neither one of them has a strategy. Neither one of them has a vision for how this is going to be resolved. Each one wants to just continue to do the same thing it's always done, and then cross your fingers and pray that the problem goes away. And it won't. It will continue to get worse and worse until the vision comes forward. The vision will come forward from people who are not angry, who are not fearful. The vision will come forward from people who are working from their hearts, working from their heart center and seeing the possibility that lies inside of the problem. The problem is just the thing that gets your attention. The possibility is where you say, wow, we can do this another way. I've mentioned this Rockefeller story in a couple of videos. I'm going to mention it again. Back in the turn of the century, John D. Rockefeller was one of the richest men in the world. And he became one of the richest men in the world because of a very needed commodity at that time, which was kerosene. Kerosene was used for lighting. Kerosene was used for heating. And it was used because it was a very stable liquid. I remember as a kid, my mom kept a jar of kerosene underneath the kitchen sink. And you could shake it, you could bake it, it stayed the same. Now, and a byproduct in the producing kerosene was this other liquid that was called gasoline. Highly unstable, highly flammable. They got rid of it as quickly as they could, and they got rid of it the way they did things in the good old days, which was dump it right in the nearest river. You put your refinery right on the river to make sure that you could dump it as fast as you could. They were dumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline to get the kerosene. And the way the story goes, Rockefeller was at one of his refineries looking at them dumping tens of thousands of gallons of gasoline and said to himself, there's got to be something we can do with that. And the rest is history. He thought he was rich before he found something to do with gasoline. Then he got rich, okay? Now, we are approaching all of our situations in our society, our political, social, cultural divide, our racial divide, again, the millions of people who are sleeping on our streets right now, our mental breakdown, the mental spiritual breakdown of individuals and our entire society, and we're approaching all of it as though they're problems. All of these things are opportunities, and they're opportunities to see ourselves, and see each other, and to see our future in a very different way. I want to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. And these examples are coming from a lot of different places, including right here in this country. But I want to start in Singapore. You've heard me talk about this also, if you've been watching all of these videos, as all of you have, I'm sure. At one point in time, right at the end, right when Singapore got its independence, it had some of the worst slums in the world. The slums in Singapore were literally mythic. You go into that slum, you don't come back out. It was a breeding ground for crime, for violence, for everything, for disease, for everything. And the leaders of Singapore said something. One of the things they said was, everybody in this society will be living in standard housing within the next X years, I think 7 years or 10 years or something like that. And people were laughing like, there's no way you could get rid of all of these slums and get everybody into standard housing that fast. And they did it because when you set that as a top priority, that means everything in the society has to change in order to meet that. So right now, there's no such thing as slums or homelessness in Singapore. Right now, 70 to 80% of the entire city of 6 million people lives in public housing. Public housing is not poor people's housing. Public housing is standard housing. Public housing is where middle-class people, upper-class people, working-class people, poor people, they all live in public housing. And the public, if you go just look at some videos, the public housing is really, really nice looking. If you want a lot of frills, you can get a lot of frills. You pay more for rent. You can live a good life in the public housing. Very recently, Singapore said, we're an island. And we have adequate water right now. Right now, we've got adequate water, but if we continue to grow, or if the climate changes, we may not have enough water. So we're going to triple our water supply. Right now, we're not going to wait around for something to hit us and then say, okay, what do we do now? So they're building desalination plants to turn salt water into fresh water. They're doing it not because they need it, because they're in league with their own future. One third thing from Singapore. Right now, Singapore is a very rich country, and they can afford to import all the food that they want from anywhere in the world, and they're doing it. But they also know that makes them food dependent and dependent on money to produce the food. And their leader said, we need to be food independent. We need to be able to feed ourselves regardless of whether we're rich or not. In fact, we need to become food exporters. We are going to export food to we have enough food for ourselves and export food to the rest of the world. And people go, are you crazy? This is a tiny island. There's buildings covering all of it. We can't make more land. Actually, they can make more land. They put more buildings on top of it. And so they said, fine, we're going to grow the food in skyscrapers. We're going to build skyscrapers simply to grow food. And they're doing it right now. They can afford to feed themselves. They can afford to keep importing. They can afford to keep doing things the old way. And they said, why are we going to wait for the future to catch up with us? We're going to go out and create our future. Now, that's the forward kind of thinking the Republican Party lacks. That's the forward kind of thinking the Democratic Party lacks. They go head to head with each other. They talk about, this policy or that policy, this program or that program. But the bottom line is they are out of step with their own future. They're out of step with the future of regular folks like us. And they're out of step with their own children and grandchildren. And I think that is something that is I was going to say unfortunate, but it's a lot stronger than that. I think it's something that is spiritually deficient inside of themselves, of not being able to hear what our own heart is saying, to not be able to hear what our own spirit is saying, to not be able to hear the spirit of all of the other trillions upon trillions of beings that are sharing this rock with us right now. To not be able to hear the billions and billions of our ancestors, the ancestors that are speaking to us, flowing through our own blood, through our own DNA. To not be able to hear the voice of the spirit that's within me and the spirit that's without me. Two more examples real quick. In the European Union, they have something called the Office of the Future. And they are supposed to be thinking. This is the office that thinks about the future. And they are mandated to start thinking about the future from 50 years forward. And the reason they said it from 50 years to the next 1,000 years or 2,000 years is that from now to 50 years, the politicians should be thinking about that. Well, maybe their politicians do, but ours certainly don't. We propose things that our politicians propose things that don't make any sense right now, let alone 10 years from now, let alone 20 years from now. Our corporations are doing things that don't make sense right now because they're all thinking about the next quarterly report and how can I get a 5% market share markup on the next quarterly report when at the bottom line, is that going to be good for me, good for us, good for the society, etc.? We don't even ask those questions. They're asking those questions in Europe. And why can't we ask those questions right here? Maybe by focusing in on our future, we can stop the nonsense of us butting heads with each other around things that don't make any sense. Last point. This happened some years ago. I think it was in the Bush administration. The head of the U.S. Air Force, the Air Force of the 4 branches of the military, the Air Force is the most energy consumptive part of the military. You can't get a jet off the ground unless you're burning an awful lot of fossil fuels. And you can't get it back down unless you're burning an awful lot of fossil fuels. So the commandant of the U.S. Air Force called in his generals and said, the U.S. Air Force in 20 years is going to be a net energy producer. Instead of being the largest part of the military that uses energy, we're going to actually export this energy to the private sector, to the public, etc. And all of his generals say, Are you crazy? No, sir. Uh, the How can we actually create so much energy we can export energy? And he says, I don't know. You figure out how to do that. You are the ones who are going to actually implement this policy. But I'm going to be here and I'm going to hold this vision. And the Air Force has done some absolutely amazing things to, first of all, reduce its energy consumption footprint. Tiny things like, instead of having these big theater lights that light up an entire hangar, just have a small light that lights up the airplane that's sitting in the hangar. Instead of having these big vehicles everybody's driving around the Air Force Base, have a lot smaller vehicles, golf carts, and have them run on electricity and have the electricity generated by by solar power. Take one of the islands in the Pacific that the U.S. controls and cover it with solar panels so that you're soaking up all of this free energy. There's an Air Force base near Utah where they actually put a tunnel from the Air Force base into the local municipal garbage dump and started siphoning off methane gas that they use to light the base. Once you set the vision, you free up all of these ideas. You open up the possibility of the human spirit. Until you set the vision, nothing happens. Or you tweak the problem, you don't try to resolve the problem. A couple of years ago, the Air Force flew a jet around the world using renewable fuel. Never been done before. And now it's been done. So now they can figure out how to do it. And so now they're still on the road to become a net energy exporter. One of my criticisms of the Obama administration, seeing this example that started with the Air Force, Obama, with a piece of paper, could have extended that to the other three services, could have said to the Army and the Navy and the Marines, each of you will become net energy exporters within 10 years or 15 years. Now, go to it. Follow the lead of the Air Force. You do not need the permission of Congress to do that. Obama was the commander-in-chief. He could actually have commanded. Him not doing that passed up an amazing opportunity. And the question is, why can't you do it? Why didn't you do it? Who are you listening to? And that's the product of another conversation. So we need to heal our future. We need to heal our vision. We need to heal ourselves to the point that we can see a path out of the mess that we've got. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to sign up for Patreon. Don't forget to copy the URL and send it to somebody else. Thank you, and I'll be with you again.
You are invited to participate in the discussions and activities that will define a positive future for all. We are at the cusp of the expansion of our human consciousness, beyond the limitations of our past. Together, we can envision a world that embraces our human potential. Together, we can create a world that can truly work for all living beings.